Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this month's webinar. My apologies for those people who tuned in or might have tried to tune in last week. I did actually post up a thing to say that I wasn't feeling great last week. So if I would encourage you, if you're watching this live, if you could actually just put into the comments below wherever you're watching it, to just sort of note where you come from and, you know, what you're hoping to get from today's webinar. I want to make sure that I can give everybody exactly what it is that they came here to find out, and just so that you're not left without any, you know, with any lingering questions. It would be good if I can know what they are. So if you put that in the comments, I'll actually be able to see that. If you're not watching this live and you're watching this a little bit later, it would be really good to just put in a post underneath and notice what it is that you found that was really beneficial from today's webinar. It can make it a bit challenging to kind of put the time and effort into putting these things together without getting some feedback about what it is that you're finding useful about them, and what are the other things that you might like some more sort of a support or help with. All right, so hi, Robbie. So yes, we have started, just saying I'm hoping that you can see it, because Robbie's saying, has it started? Yes, we've definitely started. So I'm wondering whether or not, if Robbie, you might want to just confirm for me that you actually can see. It should be posting. You should actually be able to see it now. So I'm hoping that everything will get sorted out sooner or later, Robbie, that you can actually see what we're doing. All right. So I'm without any sort of further ado, let me just start the presentation for you so that we can sort of see. You know, I'm just going to respond to Robbie and say, you know, yep, we are live. And it's always a bit funny if somebody else actually sort of says, you know, oh, good, yeah, you can see me now. So it's always good somebody's helping me out with this sort of stuff, but not today. Today I'm actually managing it all on my own. So we'll see how we go. All right, so let's just get started. Part of this is about just looking at the leadership lottery stuff. And this is a big part of where I often say to people, you know, we've got a bit of an issue when we start thinking about how leadership impacts mental health in the workplace. And today I'm going to cover off on two particular areas around mental health in particular, and how management like literally how you manage that person's sort of mental health issue, whether it was something that developed from the organization or whether it came from somewhere else, is actually a really important element to it. So I'm just, if you've got any comments along the way, just put them in and I'll come to them towards the end, and we can answer them. And as I said, if there's anybody who's got anything in particular that they want to have a look at, please make sure you put it in the comments. So welcome everybody. Robbie, I know that you're there and you're watching. It would be really useful if anybody else is actually watching this live, if you want to just put into the comments where you're watching from and if there's anything in particular that you're looking for today. All right, so prior to COVID, and I think this is one of the things that we really have to understand, right? Prior to COVID, we actually knew that 1 in 5 Australians was more likely to be suffering from a mental health condition in each year. But what we've noticed since COVID is that we now have 4 in 5 Australians actually indicating that they have mental health distress or some level of distress that's causing a problem for them in their lives. So if we've got 4 in 5 people in the population saying that they've got a bit of a problem that's a mental health related problem, our ability to manage their mental health at work is actually critical to whether or not you're going to end up with bigger problems and increased lost productivity. So this is why it's a really big problem. And I've been doing some other research for my new book actually, and I came across a statistic the other day that was just phenomenal. Literally, it says, and this was based on some research that was done in Victoria, but if we extrapolate it out to the whole country, that the impact on employers from poor mental health is costing employers $7.6 billion annually, right? So 7.6 billion. Okay, that's the cost to the employer. That's not the cost to the whole economy. The whole economy is a lot bigger, but just employers. So what's the issue? Well, employers have responsibility for psychological injuries within the workplace, but I think what's really important to understand about this bit is that if we don't, like, so there's an element of, creating psychological injuries from bullying and harassment and those sorts of things that can go on in the workplace, but it can also be about how effectively you manage somebody with a known mental health condition. And so this is one of those things that we have to recognize, that post COVID a lot more people are reporting a level of distress. I must say that actually post COVID we've got a lot more people saying it's good, because more people seem to understand that psychological challenges are a thing and it's a normal thing to do. All right, so who am I to talk to you about all of this, just in case you weren't sure? So I was actually written up as Australia's most influential woman in mental health. That was a couple of years ago. I do my best to try and make sure that we get a lot more information out there to people, because one of the things that we noticed post-COVID in particular is that there are not enough psychologists for people to access. And let me just tell you that one of the other statistics I came up with the other day was that only 1 in 15 people who need to get access to help because they've identified a mental health issue are able to access a psychologist in this country. So there are more than 5 million people a year who actually identify a mental health issue, and there are only about 350,000 services available to those people. That's it. So we've got to help people to help themselves. And part of the problem is that we need to help them in the workplace, because for most adults, that's actually where they spend the majority of their waking life. And so if we don't address it as employers, then, we end up reaping the implications from not addressing it and not being supportive of it. And, reality is we understand that it's kind of everywhere. So one of the challenges that we have in terms of when we're trying to look at how we improve the leadership approach around mental health, you have to remember that a knowledge transfer, so when we talk about the knowledge transfer model, you must have, there's a known phenomena called the 70-20-10 model. Now, 10 is made up of the formal learning environment. So that is people attending workshops and all of that sort of stuff. 20 is, specific on the job learning, where they might apply something to their work environment, which in this case I'm going to talk about it as that's the mentoring and supporting, across that level. And then the 70% is what you get from immersing yourself actually in the on-the-job learning elements. So when we start talking about our attitudes towards people and how we approach people, in the guidance of our HR issues or whatever, our documentation, everything like that, our approach is one of the things that we have to understand, that as one manager to the next or one leader to the next within an organization, the knowledge transfer is often done in that mentoring space. We might send them off for some formal learning, but the majority of people actually get promoted to be team leader or the manager or whatever it is by being the technical expert in their area, right? And then they get put into that role because they're the technical expert. But the problem is that in that technical expertise role, they actually don't end up with, you don't have this sense of, people skills that are transferred across. And there's often no formal kind of, leadership training or people management stuff that's brought in at that point, and there should be. And it's just one of the challenges that we have when we're talking about the knowledge transfer. It requires immersion, but it also requires repetition. So in order to help people become good team leaders or good managers, or, in that middle management layer in particular, we really have to give them a great mentor, some good understanding and basic training of what it means to be a team leader within your organization in terms of the policies, procedures, obligations, and then make sure that they've actually got a couple of kind of direct people that they can go to get advice when they're not sure on what their obligations are. And we'll explain a little bit more about why this is an important point going on. So as I said, 2 areas that I'm going to cover off today: mental health and managing people with known mental health issues in your workplace, but also then psychosocial injuries that develop in the workplace and what can happen with that. And we can get, depending on your sector, you'll have a range of psychosocial injuries that are probably common to your work environment. And what I mean by that is we'll often end up with a situation where you have a person who, say you've got, I don't know, I want to say somebody who goes, who works in the emergency services area, then we know that they're exposed to traumatic incidents as a result of just doing their job, right? So what you'll see is that there's a known psychosocial injury that develops in terms of PTSD that can build up. So that sector is much more aware of the psychosocial elements around PTSD development. But if you work in some other sort of sectors like, I don't know, let's just say places that are prone to bullying and harassment, or perceptions of bullying and harassment, you'll know if you go and have a look at your organization's stats around their workplace injuries, what those sorts of injuries are usually about. So if you have ones that are common to your sector, that's the area that you want to then look at what you can do to prevent those psychosocial injuries from happening, to improve your workers' comp stuff. But on the flip side, it's also about how we manage mental health has a big impact on whether or not a person feels like they're supported in the workplace and therefore can stay at work and engage in work. All right, so injuries happen, right? They happen quite commonly within all sorts of normal circumstances in the workplace. And because our injuries tend to just happen in the background, what I need you to understand is that those injuries can happen, but it's how we handle them that really impacts that person's ability to recover. And whether or not they'll come back to work has an awful lot to do with how we handled the approach to that injury. So this is where the mental health literacy of the manager has always been one of those things that people think we need to improve. But some of the stuff I'm going to show you today actually shows that the mental health literacy of the manager is not actually enough in and of itself to make a difference. So we need to understand too that majority of psychosocial injuries that happen in the workplace, so if we look at the bullying and harassment, those sorts of things, I'm not talking about PTSD development here, right? So that's one of the things I want you to just be aware of. When I talk about this bit in particular, the judgment elements and all of these things around the 3 months that people are more likely to have a psychosocial injury involving bullying or harassment within the first 3 months of them being in a new role. So that's the bit that's a really key element. I'm not talking about some other kind of psychosocial injuries here. Things like occupational violence or I mean, they can happen early on in a person's role, but occupational violence or PTSD development or those sorts of things are a little bit different. But a lot of what we know about physical injuries and psychological injuries involving bullying and harassment are often within the first 3 months. So what's the problem with that? And this is the first 3 months that somebody's now in a role, okay? So why is that an issue? Because they don't actually have any time to prove their worth. And because they don't have any time to prove their worth, there's often a judgment overlaid on top of it from the manager above them that they're just being useless, or they're just lazy, or they're just being a sook, or they just want to get the money. They just, you know what I mean? They don't actually look at this person and see them for the reality of what might have happened in that injury. They actually just often look at it and go, oh, no, they're just useless, or they're just, trying to get money or do whatever. So this is one of the things that I think is really quite important to understand. So as a leader, when we then can approach an injured worker with some level of compassion, then we can make reasonable adjustments for those people so that their return to the work environment is as smooth a transition as possible. So when we start talking about injuries specifically, and I want you to remember what I said, I'm going to talk about these two different elements. So this is the injury specifically. It's about the compassion. It's about making those reasonable adjustments for that person's return to the work environment. It's about allowing them to ease in. It's about recognizing that, even if they had an injury and they were only new to the role, that we need to try and give them the benefit of the doubt for the fact that they probably just, had an accident or something that was outside of their control, and they're doing their best to get back to work as soon as possible. But it takes time to recover from an injury, especially if it's a physical injury. So our attitude towards it, though, is one of the biggest things that is implicated in whether or not that person's going to recover quickly. So what's the problem with it? Well, stressed people who, you know, combine that with inflexible management of their injury, and what we get is increased recovery time. So in essence, the longer that you actually have that this person is, one, off work, but two, actually then, in being off work, having a bit of an issue in terms of the way that they're approached, the attitude that you take towards them. As a result of that, if you have that person, like, they'll just stay off for longer, right? They don't feel very supported in the way that you're approaching their recovery. And so this is a major issue, because if we can't find a way to manage them with more flexibility, we're not going to get them back any sooner. All right. So let's have a look, and just moving on, a big part of what we notice, and this is something that a lot of people are not aware of, but more recently there's been quite a lot of research that looks at the confidence and the attitude of the leader, and how they approach mental health, and that promotes discussion around some of the issues, and this really improves the chances of this person being engaged and coming back into the work environment sooner. Now, like I said, this can be because they've had a psychosocial injury, but it could also be just because they've gone off on a workplace injury for some reason. But the leader's confidence in being able to have those conversations and their attitude towards mental health in general are the two key indicators about whether or not a person will come back to work quickly. So when we talk about the leadership lottery, this was one of the problems that was identified actually in the emergency services area. And Stuart Bartels from the Australian Institute of Police Management was the one who highlighted the term to me, and it was something that came to him out of Western Australian Police. And it's generally known that even when we develop these challenging issues, because we work in, just say, an emergency services context as an example, that it's the attitude of the manager that still determines the effectiveness of how well this person's going to return to the work environment, and how quickly, because it's about how well supported they are and how well we communicate the issues and known, challenges, and let them know that we're okay with all of the stuff that they've got challenges with, right? So this is a really important point, and I can't really emphasize enough the impact of confidence. Now, confidence is not something that we can readily teach just in a standard kind of, lecture environment. Confidence is something that we have to actually give people opportunity to develop skills by supporting them to do things like role play. So if I'm working with an organization and we're trying to actually improve the mental health confidence of managers, what we're doing is some scenario situations where we get them to, kind of look at vignettes and have a look at, well, what would you do in this situation, and give them some coaching and some practicing, so that they know that they can feel more confident in taking a particular approach. But also it's about putting in place a network around them of people that they can go to, and to escalate an issue if they tried to have a conversation that didn't go so well. What's the sort of thing that they need to do in terms of how they kind of then approach that person, or getting some support for themselves to make sure that they don't feel uncomfortable about taking the approach, because this is a big part of where the person's ability to get back into the work environment has an awful lot to do with feeling included. So maintaining contact where appropriate is important. And the reason that I put where appropriate, and this is a really hard thing to get right? I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's easy. It's not. But depending on why a person is out of the work environment, so if it was a workplace injury that involved their supervisor and they felt bullied, then that supervisor constantly contacted them is not going to be the way that's going to make them feel included and supported, right? But there should be somebody within the organization who is tasked with actually maintaining contact with that person in a very neutral way. So, and this is a really individual thing, but I need I need you to understand that the sooner you can maintain some level of contact and give a conduit point for all communication, if it is a bullying and harassment thing, the easier it is to actually try and support that person to find an alternative way to make some sort of contribution to the workplace. If they go off work because they have just a mental health issue that has escalated for themselves, that may have nothing to do with the work environment, but it can be exacerbated by being in the work environment for some people. For other people, being at work might actually be the thing that helps them to work their way through it. So I want you to think about people who've just recently had a relationship breakdown as an example. Everybody's going to go through some level of low mood or anxiety or, some feeling of not being on top of their game. It's the connection with those people and asking them what sort of support they need, and then being able to give them some flexibility, but maintaining contact if they need to stay off work for an extended period of time. Because it's this feeling of still being included and not being judged for having issues that might affect their ability to turn up at work every day, or even it might affect their ability to be 100% on their game. And so, communicating openly about our challenges as human beings is one of the things that makes it much easier to be more accepted and open about some of those challenges in the work environment. And look, each work environment is, you know, some are better than others at being able to talk openly about some of these challenges in an acceptance kind of way. But I want you to notice that you can also recognize when a staff member, as a leader, is actually avoiding being in the workplace. And, we can't just assume that the avoidance is because of an issue in the workplace. It might be, but not all mental health issues are caused by the workplace. We could have, if you stop and think about the range of issues that you've ever managed as a manager with your leader, with your people, you'll get everything from, a family member's ill, to, maybe the staff member is ill themselves and they could have cancer or some other kind of challenge that they're dealing with. They could have relationship issues. They could have, parent issues, somebody passes away, whatever. All of these challenges that we experience as human beings are going to impact how we turn up at work. And you just can't have a separation really between work and life. Despite the fact that people say, oh, you don't bring your personal life into work, you actually can't avoid bringing those personal issues into work. They impact how we show up every day. Now, some people are better at compartmentalizing their stuff so that they can, especially I find people who have to wear a uniform to work, it allows them to switch into that part of self that's just their working part, and they can march off and do their thing, and they can close off a lot of the stuff that's related to their personal sort of issues and leave that at home. So, recognizing that a staff member is being avoidant, I think, is a really important part of being able to initiate the conversation. And I'll talk to you a little bit later about how you initiate those conversations, and there's some questions and ways that we can go about it. We can't go into a lot of detail today, obviously, because we don't have time, but the ability to be able to feel confident in initiating those conversations is key to whether or not a manager will actually do it, and whether they will initiate some of those conversations and communicate openly about the challenges is actually the key to whether or not this person's going to come back into the work environment sooner rather than later, and in a more effective way. A person who is out of the work environment for any reason, if they are given a supported place to be in the work environment and do what I call recover at work, you are going to get a much better outcome from that person. So what's important in recognizing what's going on for that person is about acknowledging their pain. It doesn't matter what the pain cause was, whether it's personal or it's a workplace issue, but acknowledging their pain is number one to them feeling validated in you supporting them regardless of their situation. And it's just one of those things, doesn't take much, right? It really doesn't take much to acknowledge a person's pain. Being able to truly actually, rather than just kind of go, that must be terrible. Okay, sorry. Oh, while you're here, I just want to talk to you about this. It's kind of like you have to do it in a sincere way, right? You can't just turn around and fob them off. Oh, yeah, that's terrible. So, by the way, you just need to give them a sense that you really have some empathy for where they're at. And validating their pain has a big impact on whether or not they still want to turn up and, give you their best, no matter what that best might be. That best might not be very much, but as long as it's there and they're doing their best to be there, that's as much as we can ask for them in that moment. I always sort of say to people, if you can prevent somebody going off on a workplace injury, you are better off than, trying to chase them up and get them back into the workplace once they're gone. So this is a big part of where I talk to people a lot about your ability to be able to recognize when a person's stressed. And the minute that they go off on stress leave, if you don't want that stress leave to turn into a workers' comp claim and you know that there's some sort of perception of bullying or harassment, you really need to intervene to get that person to understand that you're supporting them and that you want them to come back into the work environment because you value them, and that you'll assist them to go and work in a different situation, like team or scenario, whatever it is, so that they can still make an active contribution to the business, right? Because having them out of the work environment is a major cost to you. It's a major cost not only in lost productivity or time, but if they go off on a workers' comp, like longer term workers' comp issue, that also costs you an increased workers' comp premiums, retraining another person to do that same role. So it's really much more worthwhile to try and keep this person engaged in whatever way you can, even if they're not contributing 100%, even if they're not contributing at 50%. Actually having them in the work environment to help them recover has a much greater impact in terms of their ability to be able to get back to work quicker. And that's actually what you need, right? Ideally, you want to notify, like you want a system in place internally that escalates where there's a problem before they get to the point of going off on stress leave, right? You want some sort of traffic light system across your team to understand if there's a problem before they actually end up going off to the doctor, right? And you should be given some indications that there's a problem. But if you keep getting that awareness that there is a problem between two people in your team and you don't address it, don't be surprised if the next thing that you get is just a medical certificate that says this person's not coming back into the work environment because they don't feel supported. You need to take the time to manage the people. And it's the one problem that we have when we actually get promoted to these levels. And a lot of people will complain at this point and go, I just feel like I'm not doing my job anymore. All I'm doing is managing the people, right? But that is a part of the role. And I'll often say in large organizations, you kind of don't need, you need to look at the restructuring of your team setup, because if you've got a technical team, they might need a technical leader. That doesn't necessarily mean that that person should be the team leader from the people stuff. You also probably want a side person who's the people person, right? Because often, and I don't mean to stereotype, but often we find people with very technical skills don't necessarily have the level of people skills that we need for certain roles or environments. So we want to try and make sure we can marry that up. And a lot of people, a lot of organizations don't value the people side of things. And I really don't like using the term the soft skills, but I know it's one thing that people talk about a lot. So, recognizing that soft skills are a mandatory part of the role is one thing, but you can't necessarily make people learn soft skills. Certain people have, we develop skills and attributes over the course of our life. Our attributes are often those things that we naturally kind of carry. And so the ability to manage people is one of those things that's often an attribute. You can skill somebody up in the processes around managing people, but it's not necessarily the same thing. So this is a big part of where I talk about policies and why it's important to review your policies, right? Because in reviewing policies or having a look at the consistency about how often or how regularly they're applied across the organization, what you're doing is giving people this sense of awareness that they're not just set and forget, that you've actually gone through, looked at policies, made sure that they're still relevant, and also checking that they're applied consistently across an organization. The larger an organization gets, the more important the consistency question is to answer. And we need to kind of work out ways to get the information about the consistency, because a lot of people kind of go, well, I'm not sure how to assess that. There are there are many and varied ways that we can assess the application consistency of policies and processes, but it's just that you have to actually have them effectively set up first, and you have to provide some training to your managers to make sure about the application. And that usually means that they have to go to a single point to get confirmation about what, well, what does this mean or that mean, if the wording of a policy is not really clear. And, I find in government in particular, we find a lot of policies are very broadly written, and they're quite open to interpretation. And a lot of government stuff is written that way, deliberately, right? Because they means that they've got a lot of leeway in it. But when it comes down to how a person should be treated, we don't want that airy fairiness to be there. It needs to be really clear about, well, what does this mean? And making sure that it's written down, what does this mean for individuals in a consistent way is really important. So going through and reviewing your policies and making sure that they're applied consistently is really quite important. Also then looking at what's the escalation process of an issue. So making sure that all staff have awareness about what they can do if they feel that there's an issue that needs to be escalated because the person making the decision above them is not making the decision in line with the policy that they believe. There needs to be a sideways option for that person to escalate the issue. And I always say to organizations, people who are scared of having this sideways kind of bit, it never makes a lot of sense to me unless they're trying to, manipulate things for their own kind of benefits, right? Because there should be an escalation process that says we apply this consistently across the board, so that the person in this team shouldn't be hearing that John over there in that team, well, he got to have flexible work arrangements and work from home, and I was refused. There just shouldn't be that kind of comparison across an organization. There should be an awareness of, here are the kind of situations in which we can manage flexibility to work from home. It might be role dependent, it might be location, it might be a range of different things, but you need to sort of spell it out, and you need to make sure that there is an escalation process internally that gives that person a sense of feeling consistently that they're being approached in the same way that John over there is being approached, and Mary in the other team as well. Because if there's any underlying whispers that people are getting treated differently in different teams, then it just creates this like absolute poison chalice where people will start then focusing on what they're not getting rather than just getting on with the job. And so it's a big thing to just kind of focus on these escalating issues elements to provide a sense of fairness. So then I'm going to say we need to talk about how we mentor within the organization. So mentoring, when mental health awareness is an important element. And I hear it a lot. A lot of organizations will talk about, yes, we've done mental health first aid. And look, mental health first aid is a great kind of, entry point. But what I notice about mental health first aid is it usually creates a level of awareness around mental health issues in other people, that we're not necessarily thinking about even our own mental health, and sometimes how we're feeling impacts the way that we're approaching somebody at any given point in time. And this is one of the things that I think in a middle management layer, that's one of the most critical elements of any of that sort of team leader training or any of those things. It's not just recognizing the problems in others. It's recognizing that when we're actually also under a reasonable amount of stress or pressure or whatever it is, that sometimes our approaches to people's requests for things become more rigid and not as flexible. And so we need to that's why that sort of escalation process outside it is one of the things that's really quite an important thing to do. We should escalate right outside, but then we need to bring 3 people in to have a joint discussion. There should never be, and I say this in organizations all the time, if you want to resolve the problem, okay, you want to have 3 people involved in that conversation. If one person comes to you and says, I've got an issue with this person because they're not doing this with me, then, it's not your job. If you're the next manager up, it's not your job to then go and talk to that person one-on-one and then kind of do the Chinese whispers thing, because it doesn't work. You actually then need to bring both of those people in and talk openly in a mentoring way. You want to give them a mediation approach to it, and you want to mentor how that mediation approach actually works, because this is the bit that is about communication, and it's about hearing what the other person's sort of saying and then trying to see if we can find a solution to the problem. So I always say to people, mentor a solution focus rather than a problem focus. If you're always the person that they have to come to because you're the one that solves all of the problems, you are never going to create a problem solving culture. So you want them to come to you with a solution, never just the problem. Because you'll find that if you've always kind of just done the problems and you're the only one who can make a decision, all you constantly get is more and more problems. And you want them to try and be empowered to develop a solution to their problem. So mental health awareness is one part of it. Trying to mentor the idea about how we might take a more flexible approach to somebody's mental health condition if they've got one and it's diagnosed and they've identified it, might require you to bring in some sort of expert help to get some idea about what you can do, what's a reasonable adjustment for that person, that sort of idea. You want to try and build this up within your HR area so that you've got some mental health awareness around, we've got to be careful not to discriminate against somebody under the Disability Act, but we also want to help them get back to work in a way that makes them feel valued and a valued, important, contributing member of this team. Right. So there's a balance there, and it's not an easy balance to get right, but at least most people who work in areas where they feel that they're at least they're trying to do something are much more receptive and open to trying to kind of give a little bit back as well. So it's a really important element to it. Supporting the vulnerable, and this is where we talk about that mental health sort of awareness training for managers. It's not just about their literacy, it's not just about what they understand, but a lot of it is about their attitudes towards things and then their sense of feeling comfortable in talking about stuff. And so supporting the vulnerable is an important thing to do, but it doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. And so we have to look at the kinds of support and training that we're giving people. We do a lot about coaching for leadership. We should be looking at coaching your leaders to become more compassionate leaders, right? So doing that more one-on-one sort of coaching work. And I do that with some leaders where I've worked in the organization and they've recognized that, certain managers within their team need more support to understand how to take a more compassionate approach and, improve that communication. A lot of that can be done in that one-on-one coaching role. So it's just looking at how you do it. Going back to what I said before, acknowledging the pain. I always say sorry is not an admission of liability. It's just the acknowledgement of another person's pain. And if we can acknowledge that pain, you would be amazed at the difference that it makes. So it doesn't have to be something that we're responsible for. Somebody who's having an issue in their family life, or they've just discovered that, they've got cancer, or their child's got cancer, or something else is going on that's going to affect their ability to turn up and give 100% at work. If we can just acknowledge the pain that that's causing them, then you'll find that they'll show up a whole lot more when they are able. So I always find that ability to be flexible actually then leads to this person feeling valued by you as a manager. And so what they do is, even though they might not be able to be there all the time because they've got to go to appointments or they've got to do whatever, when they are there, they're actually doing their 100% for the time that they're there. They're really trying hard because they recognize that you're supporting them in their challenges. And it's a really empowering bit that if you can kind of develop this culture of support around these issues, it makes the world of difference to a person's ability to recover and get back to work a lot quicker. So connection's a big part of that. And so I often talk about the fact that it's reminding these people that even if they're not in the work environment for whatever reason, that they are still part of the team. I say this to people, it seems a silly thing, but even people who go off on maternity leave, they're off with the baby. One of the biggest problems that they have is feeling that they don't belong anymore, that they don't actually have anybody there around them, and that sense of being able to connect. They might come in and bring the baby in once or so, but they don't get invited to team lunches or anything while they're off. And so these are the things that are also really important to just recognize, that there is opportunity within a whole range of different things that we do as human beings to make people feel that they're valued. So I talk about the fact that when we when we look at things like EAP programs and stuff, that we're doing an external early intervention, but that's actually too late. Within an organization, if you're sort of waiting for the problem to appear, or like it might be that they've gone off on stress leave or whatever, and you go, I'll go and see the EAP people, you've kind of missed the opportunity to intervene really early. And we talk about prevention activities being prior to an early intervention thing. What are you doing with your people to actually help to stop them kind of then taking that stress that they're experiencing and just deciding that their only option is to get out the door? Because sending them to the EAP is not actually helpful, because it's just an externalizing of the problem. They go to an external provider who doesn't understand the culture, and that person just validates what this person is feeling, because they're the one sitting in the chair telling them how they're feeling and how unfair it is. And often what that does is actually increases this person's sense of feeling, quite justified and, invalidated, or whatever they're feeling by the organization. And that doesn't necessarily help that person to maintain a role and stay engaged in the workplace. So it's actually a bit of a risk when you get to this point. So you really want to try and do it much earlier. So we talk about a multi-stage framework in your organization, looking at promotion activities. You want to try and build up awareness around mental health. Yes, you might have done mental health first aid, but what else do you do to kind of promote the fact that, mental health is something that we all have to manage as human beings, right? You, me, the guy next door, everybody, right? The fact that people develop mental health issues is something that can happen to any person at any point in time. 20% of the population have a mental health issue that they put their hand up for every year. And this year it might be me, and next year it might be you. So recognizing that this is an element of just creating that kind of awareness. And what we've seen over COVID is that we've got much greater awareness of mental health problems being problems, that mental health experiences or mental health distress is something that we can all experience when we have external factors that start to control what we can and can't do. And people don't like it for good reason. They don't like it, but that's what this is about. So promotion, prevention, and early intervention activities, depending on the size of your organization, you'll have quite a few of them in place. Or if you're only a small organization, you might have none. If you're a larger organization, you don't have any, I've got real concerns for you. There's some elements of this that are pretty simple to put in place, and it's a really important bit. So going back to what I said about recovery at work, the 3 keys about people being able to remain engaged in the work environment are looking at the awareness of the problem and, providing them with some validation for the fact that how they're feeling is how they're feeling, and it's quite okay, but you want to try and do everything you can to help them to remain at work in the best possible capacity that they have, and then giving them a sense of purpose. So a big part of what we see when people go off on a workplace injury, they don't get brought back into the work environment because their job belongs somewhere and that person can't work with that person or whatever. The sooner you can, and I've said this to lots of places, like create a small unit that sits under your HR team or whatever, where a person can come back and, work on a project that will enable them to feel like they're making a positive contribution and that they have a purpose for turning up every day. It's the quickest way to actually get them back into the workplace and, engaging. So just let me check in there. If anybody has, if you want to put comments in, Robbie, I don't know whether or not you might have a comment about this, but is there one thing that I've talked about so far that's been helpful for you? I've got some really exciting news. So now that we've got to this bit, don't run away, because you're going to love what I'm about to show you. So if you've got any comments about the helpful bits that I've covered so far, if you want to put those into the comments now, that would be great. And if you're watching this later, just put that into the comments later on, and we'll come back to them and actually make, I want to check into what people think was useful and helpful. And, if there's any other ideas that you have about things you need to know about, please just let me know what they are. But any helpful comments, post them in and I'll come back to them. So the exciting news is that we've got a new scorecard. Now, I haven't quite made this live. I'm just finalizing some little tweaky bits. But I wanted to help you understand what kind of mind manager you were. And, maybe you or people that you work with, it's like having a look at this quiz that kind of says, okay, so, what is my understanding of mental health? What are my attitudes towards mental health? And what is my level of confidence about discussing mental health issues? And putting that into a scorecard that says, okay, these are the areas that you're doing really well in, and this is the area that you might want to have a look at, and highlighting that there are, out of the 5 different areas that we actually cover in the scorecard, that there are 2 that are key to making sure that out of this leadership lottery that we talk about, that you're going to get the best outcome. And then giving you access to some information after that might help you to do some self-paced learning about what it is that you can do to improve that sort of awareness or your level of comfort about how you communicate regarding mental health. So for those of you who've registered for the webinar, then you'll receive an email after this webinar actually giving you some information about how you access that assessment. So very excited about that. I hope you're as excited as I am about it. The scorecard results measure 5 key areas, as I said, so it'll give you an overall score. And it covers off these 5 areas. So the first one is the awareness. So we talk about that really is looking at your mental health literacy as a manager. Then it's looking at your attitudes, which is actually about personal stigma. So it's the perception that you have about mental health, just in general. Your role approach, which is looking at your beliefs about what your role is as a manager and how you apply that. Then looking at the confidence that you have, and this is the perceived confidence that you have about your own ability to actually, communicate with people when they've got some of these issues, how you go about it. And then looking at your actual actions. So contact is looking at the actions that you have taken in the past about approaching people where you've, known that they've been off on a long-term sort of leave situation or something like that. Those 5 things in particular, we always used to think that it was, awareness and attitudes that would make the difference. But actually, awareness comes into it only a little bit. It's really, and awareness, I need you to understand, is where the mental health first aid stuff comes from. So awareness is one part of it, but it's actually not. Research shows that it's not related to the outcome. So, let me just clarify that. So research actually says that if you've got mental health literacy, so think mental health first aid, you've got some level of awareness around mental health, but that awareness does not translate into more effective communication and better engagement of those staff members and making modified or adaptation sort of things in terms of what we consider a compassionate leader would do. So awareness actually doesn't make a difference to the approach that you're going to take to that staff member. So that's a really important point, because up until recently, research actually was, most people thought that it did, that would fix it. As long as people were aware of it, then they would make adjustments for it. They can be aware of it, but it doesn't actually change their likelihood of making adjustments. Okay, so we've got some training up there for managers. This one looks at addressing psychosocial challenges in the workplace. If you've got a particular need in your workplace that you're looking for somebody to help you out with in terms of specific or bespoke training for your people, then please reach out to us and let me know, and we can have a look. Even if you're not sure how to address the problems, one of the things that I am probably pretty good at is making sure that we get down to the nitty-gritty problems behind, what the issues are for your organization. And they're often not what you think they are. And so taking some time to unpack those problems and the issues that you're seeing is a really valuable thing to do. And, that's not going to cost you anything other than your time. So one of the other things that I often deliver is the mental muscle method for teams. So looking at building resilience across the board. So this is something that will go into an organization and actually look at your overall kind of team structure and where you've feeling, well, where you're finding that those issues are. And if we kind of give everybody the same level of, support and training and bring them up at the same time, we find that that really improves the ability for everybody to be more resilient in the workplace. So more resilient people, what does that mean for you? They have enhanced focus, they're improved flexibility, they've actually got a good level of mental strength, and they show increased endurance at being able to kind of focus and commit themselves to things within your workplace. So my challenge to you for 2022 is, how do we help you create a psychologically healthy workplace? And there are a range of things that we can do to help you, with that psychologically healthy workplace. A lot of people know that this is something they want to get to. They don't often know how to do it. So please remember, like I said, that it used to be 1 in 5. Now it's 4 in 5 that report psychological distress from COVID. So it might be you or me, it might be my boss, it might be my PA or my partner, or could be stakeholders or peers, but it's now 4 in 5. And that is one of the things that is really important that I want you to just remember. It's the majority of the people now that we interact with on a daily basis who are reporting that they're having some level of mental health distress or psychological distress. So it's not the uncommon thing that it used to be. Okay. And I'm going to say it never really was. I just want to say it never really was that uncommon. It's just not something that we used to openly talk about. And that's probably one of the positive things about COVID, is it's actually raised the level of mental health literacy across the community. So we're much more aware of mental health being an issue, and we're usually more accepting that it's an issue for lots of people. It's not a weird thing that, only broken people are prone to. All right. So if you want to know more, you can grab a copy of my book, The Trouble with Trauma. That's available in print or ebook. But the next exciting thing is that there is a new book coming, and I'm actually writing this at the moment. I alluded to this earlier. This is the new book, The Trouble with Trauma at Work. What I'm actually doing with this book is I'm interviewing leaders in different sectors about the things that they have done to improve the outcomes for their people. So if you have actually done something really interesting in your workplace and you have a senior manager who wants to be interviewed by me for this book, then please put into the comments below, or DM me through LinkedIn, probably send me a private message, make a recommendation, or give me the email address for a person who I can be in contact with. We're trying to do this across varying sectors. So it's really important that we try and get a breadth of people who've, got some leadership sort of things that they've done in the workplace. And I'm also interviewing people who have been affected or injured in the workplace due to psychological or physical injuries that have then had secondary psychological challenges. So, but don't please inundate me with lots of those people, because unfortunately the reality is that we have a lot more people who identify that they've been mistreated than we do having people saying that they've got, great things in place that they've done to improve it. So, I really don't need to interview more of the people who were badly affected, unfortunately. But if you've got a great leadership person, I'd really love to talk to them, because it's really useful to have that. And so hopefully The Trouble with Trauma at Work will be out early in 2023. So that's quite exciting. All right. Any questions that anybody might have? And because, the comments thing gets a little bit slow here, we've only got a couple of minutes, but if there's anybody that's got any questions, please just put them into the comments below this broadcast now, and I'll be able to see them pop up as we go, and I can put a comment in, or I can address them straight away. Hopefully, Robbie, you were able to stick around and get some information. If anybody else has anything that they want to just let me know that they really, found interesting or useful, or if there was something that they feel like I missed and they want some more information from that, that would be another thing that you can feel free to pop into the comments now. And yeah, if anybody's got anything in particular that they're hoping to, get out of a future webinar. So our next one next month, and it's interesting, I just got to work out timing for that one, because then I'm off to Europe for a couple of months because I'm actually going to write the book and do some other stuff. I'm speaking at a conference and doing some other things. So, okay. So, Robbie, so helpful, like informative, yep, and share with the HR team. Important pillar of true leadership and mentor and coaching staff in the early intervention for mental health matters. Great. And thanks, Robbie. Yep, 100% agree that it's one of the things that we, especially the early stuff, and because we often don't talk about the fact that a lot of people have their injuries within the first 3 months of a role. I think a lot of people don't understand the implications that that has just in terms of how we onboard people and train them up and give them an idea about what's expected of them and, what's done to support them and, what the processes behind HR issues are. So I think that that's a really useful thing. So thank you. I'm glad that you got some benefit out of that. And look, anybody else, if you want to actually share the information with your team, please feel free to go ahead and share it around. You'll find if you go to my website, kerryhoward.com.au, you'll get some further information there. On Instagram, we always post the videos that I do live every Wednesday and, some of the other information that we record around helping you to become a better, more compassionate leader. That's one of the things that I'm really extremely passionate about, wanting to help leaders who are looking to improve and also support organizations to improve how they support their people. And it's a really key element to being able to prevent psychological injuries from developing. And it's one of the reasons that I talk about this all the time is because, sending them to somebody like me, one, it's a bit too late in the process. And two, there are not enough of me around. And I'm not just talking about me, but psychologists and especially ones who specialize in trauma. There aren't enough of us around, and they're just the wait times to get into people are extremely long and arduous. And if we can prevent the injury from developing in the first place, and that's what comes down to what you do in your work environment, then that makes it so much better and so much easier for people to, then feel like they can maintain their turning up in their work environment on an ongoing kind of basis, right? Sorry, I'm starting to get a tickle talking too much without water. All right. So thank you for your attendance today. And as I said, please feel free to share it around. And I will be back next Wednesday doing a live talking about something else to do with prevention, which I probably haven't defined as yet. But yeah, if there's anything there that you particularly like to know a bit more about, please let me know and I can address that in next week's live. Otherwise, I might see you at next month's webinar. All right. See you soon.